So recently, an anime by the name of Horimiya came out, and I have to say, I'm quite enjoying it. It's a fun little show for me to watch, and so far it isn't really annoying in the way that you would assume it to be. For most romance anime, there's usually a bunch of misunderstandings that the characters would get over if they just spent more than 20 seconds talking about it, but for the most part, the characters so far seem to be pretty upfront with a lot of their feelings. Anyways, the 4th episode of the show just dropped and I've been waiting to watch it because I recently found out that there was another adaptation that came out in 2012 based on the same manga. Hey, this is Future Ethereon here to tell you that I'm a fucking idiot. This was not based off of the manga, this is actually closer to the original version of the story. Apparently it started off as a 4-panel webcomic that got this as an adaptation, which would later be repurposed into what we have today. I didn't know this while recording, so just bear with me here. I watched it all and noticed that for the most part it covered the same events in each episode as the new one does, hence this video. Before you continue on, there are obviously going to be spoilers from Horimiya, so if that's a problem, then don't watch this video. Another thing I want to say is that it might sound like I'm praising the old version of Horimiya and saying that it's better than the new one. That is not the case. I do think that the old version has some pretty strong elements to it, but overall, I prefer watching the new one. I also think that in general, the 4 episodes that the new version adapted are better than the old ones, so now that that's out of the way, there were quite a few differences that I noticed just from episode 1. And no, I'm not talking about how cheap this looks. The first thing that I'd like to bring up is the character Hori. Don't get the wrong idea, Hori is very similar in both versions, but there are a few subtle differences. For example, she's already familiar with who Miyamura is as a person in this episode, and the first few minutes of this episode are a flashback of how they got acquainted with each other. Because of that, she comes off as a lot less forceful? Okay, that might be a bit confusing, but to show what I mean, here's a scene from the first episode of Horimiya. It's a scene where Miyamura tells Hori that someone else saw him like this, to which Hori responds by saying that she doesn't like the idea of anyone else seeing him that way. Miyamura tries to cheer her up by saying that he also doesn't want anyone to see her like this, and she responds by doing this. Now at this moment I'm just like, what the hell? Not only did you initiate this conversation, making you just as guilty of saying cringy shit, but he was trying to make you feel better about something that you honestly shouldn't have felt sad about, and you just smack him in the face with a cold-ass glass of tea? What an asshole! Afterwards, she just calls Izumi a dummy over and over again, fulfilling her role as the tsundere of the show. Now, in the OVA episodes, the same situation occurs. Hori is sad because someone else saw Miyamura's hidden side, and Miyamura tries to make her feel better, and this is how she responds in that version.
なんかこの時間って俺だけのものなんだっていつも思うよ。バカなことばっか言ってんじゃないわよ。たく、バカよ、バカ。
So 2 things. I find this interaction to be a lot more natural and human. Instead of smacking the shit out of the guy she likes, where he just blushes and calls him stupid, which she does for less time, making it a lot easier for me to find it endearing. Second, I'd also like to bring attention to the context of this scene in both versions. In both versions, the two are having dinner with each other along with Sota, Hori's younger brother. But I really like how the scene was shot in the original, showing an overhead view of the table the characters are eating at while they continue on with their conversation. It gives me the impression that the 3 of them are already pretty close and familiar with each other. Details like how they pass around the ketchup bottle are cool to see, and it frames the scene as strangely intimate, like they're already a family and they're just asking each other about how their day was over dinner. Another change to the scene that made it better in my opinion was the fact that it happened in episode 2, giving us a lot of time to see the 2 of them get closer, causing the whole scenario to be more organic. This brings me to the structure of the show in general. I noticed that in each episode of the original series, more material is tackled altogether. For example, in the first episode, the show not only establishes Hori and Miyamura's relationship, but it also shows Miyamura's past as well. We get more insight into how he was as a kid, always alone. This made it easier to understand why he would kind of fear Hori and Ishikawa dating each other because he would get in the way, and there wouldn't be any reason for him to visit Hori anymore. Now again, this might sound like I'm only praising the original show while only criticizing the new one, but this is also also a flaw with the original show as well. I'll go into it more later, but for now, I still want to mainly talk about episodes 1 and 2 of the original anime. Another difference I noticed in episode 1 of the original anime was that the show decided to focus more on Ishikawa and Miyamura's relationship as well. We still get to see a side of this in the new anime, but the original makes Miyamura and Ishikawa closer from the start by placing the scene of them talking on the roof right after they became friends with each other in episode 1. This pairs well with Miyamura's past feelings of solitude, helping him to move past it. This is reinforced by the part where instead of leaving Miyamura alone for a group project, Ishikawa immediately chooses Izumi as a groupmate and is quickly joined by Hori and Yuki. I feel like the ending for this episode is pretty great too. As Miyamura is about to leave the classroom with his friends, he turns to see his past self sitting alone, and instead of feeling sorry for himself, he says that it's okay and it will be okay, and after he leaves, we look inside to see the lonely child nowhere in sight. I think this is a stronger way to symbolize Miyamura's growth than how it's handled in episode 3 of the new anime. In the new version, Miyamura just thinks to himself that he wish he could have said it'll be okay to his past self. Moving on to episode 2 of the original Horimiya anime, this episode, like its newer counterpart, focuses on Hori's feelings about her and Miyamura eventually separating. It also delves into Hori's stressful relationship with the student council. There are two pretty major differences in these episodes. One is that Remy is painted as more of an asshole in this version, manipulating the student council president into framing Hori for her budgeting mistake. Another is that it also draws attention to Hori's goals and aspirations, them being nothing. Well, nothing clear anyway. She doesn't know what she's going to do in the future, and she's really worried about it. It gives us more insight into Hori's character, an interesting side to her that not many people know about, kind of like the theme of the show. It's a neat touch and added detail. Remember when I talked about the pretty cool shot of Hori and Miyamura talking over dinner? Well, right after this scene, Hori is met with the possibility that she won't be able to see Miyamura in the future. This is different from the new one where the scene plays after Miyamura finds out Hori's birthday is coming soon. The new version makes me feel lonely, seeing that Miyamura is absent and far away, while the old one gives me a sense of anxiety, seeing a pair so close to each other possibly being ripped apart. I think both versions are fine. The newer one shows the two apart, giving each character time to themselves while making the possibility more present, while the old one focuses on building upon the relationship more for the same effect. As I mentioned before, another difference is that the old version decided to make Remy more of a straight-up antagonist. After Miyamura clears the whole thing up, Remy tells the crowd to move along, meaning she could have done this the entire time, yet only chose to now since her image was at stake. Apart from that, the crowd was pretty quick to accuse Hori of wrongdoing in this version, whereas in the newer one, the students were hesitant to attack her at first. Overall, I prefer the way the newer one handled this scene. It's not as overly dramatic as the other one, and there are also other reasons that I'll get into later. However, episode 2 of the original anime ends on a pretty sweet note. A rainstorm kicks up as the two main characters are about to head home, and Miyamura gives Hori his jacket to keep her from getting wet. He does this because both of them forgot their umbrellas. As they're leaving, Hori asks Miyamura why he's always by her side. I like this moment because the entire episode Miyamura has always been helping Hori in some way. He gave her an extra copy of the application form. He helped her out with housework. He helped her out when she was being framed for Remy's screw-up. And the possibility of the two separating was brought up in this very episode. It all builds up really nicely to this final moment of the episode itself. Overall, I like episodes 1 and 2 of the original anime more than episodes 1 and 2 of the new one, but if you're a fan of the new one, don't worry because I'm about to go hard on the old version now. Episode 3 is where it all fell apart for the original Horimiya. First off, why is Remy here? This is another reason why I don't like the anime's portrayal of Remy in the original. So she does that kind of shit to Hori and then they're just hanging out together. I understand the president and, green hair, but why is Remy here? In the new version, Hori still isn't that friendly with Remy. They even get into an argument in their first interaction after the whole budget crisis. And in the new version, Remy is more sympathetic, being portrayed as an incompetent worker. You know, she still kind of sucks, but at least there are traces of a decent human being in there. Anyways, screw this pink-haired troglodyte. Next issue with this episode is the padding. My god, is it terrible here. You know how I said I hate it when a romance anime throws a bunch of misunderstandings to throw a wrench into the main relationship and stir up a bunch of unneeded drama? Well, the original Horimiya decided to do that very thing with its 3rd and 4th episode. There's a scene where Hori and Miyamura holds hands and they confess to each other in a really roundabout way. Afterwards, the two get confused, wondering if the other actually likes them or not, and then they avoid and run away from each other instead of just having a conversation. They both want things to go back to normal, and once things go back to normal, they feel sad because they end up thinking the other didn't mean anything when saying,
好きだ。
My lord, we know you two like each other. The other characters know that you like each other. Just start going out. We've seen this story 1,000 times. No one's interested anymore. Okay, well, some people are, but just as many people are interested in what happens after. We'll get to how bad episode 4 is in a minute, but let's compare this to how the newer version handled this scene. They hold hands, they confess to each other in a roundabout way, it ends in an ambiguous way. And that's it. No bullshit misunderstandings, it just moves on to the next scene. That scene being one where Izumi and Toru get into a fight over Hori. It's the same scene as the original where Toru tells Miyamura that Hori definitely likes him. Just to point out a minor difference between these two scenes, after Miyamura goes full defense mode and beats the shit out of Ishikawa, there's a moment where he looks like he regretted what he did. He genuinely looks sorry for how he treated his friend, whereas in the original, he doesn't even show a hint of remorse. In the new one, his face has a much more apologetic look on it, and his body language indicates that what he was doing was in the heat of the moment, so he wasn't thinking. He says that it was self-defense as an excuse so that he wouldn't feel so bad about it, but in the new one, it feels like he legitimately thinks he's in the right in this situation. What a fucking asshole. His friend hits him once by accident and he proceeds to beat the shit out of him. Oh, and this person was one of his first friends after years of isolation and loneliness, and he doesn't even feel bad about it. Makes me kind of wish Hori smacked him in the face with a glass of tea then. Aside from that, I feel like this scene fits more into the episode in this version because this is the episode where the show goes into Miyamura's past, and the scene where Ishikawa and Miyamura talked on the roof also happened in this episode. Another difference in this version is that this argument actually takes place after Hori and Miyamura hold hands. It doesn't really make much of a difference to the scene itself, but I thought it would be interesting to add on. Anyways, the moment where the two hold hands had a lot more build-up than the original version. As far as it goes, the original episode's build-up is one playful scene of Yuki grabbing Hori's hands, saying that it's supposed to make your heart skip a beat, as well as a scene where Toru tells Miyamura that Hori definitely likes him, whereas the new version of that episode had both of those moments, as well as a flashback of Hori being the first one to talk to Miyamura in class, and a delightful scene of Hori putting Remy in her place. The next problem with this episode that I had is with something that I praised the original adaptation before, the fact that it tackles more material in a single episode than the new one. I mentioned back then that this was also a problem with the show, and my problem comes from a character named Shindo. The reason why the original Horimiya was able to cover multiple aspects of the story well is because each of those aspects fit well with each other. Let me explain. In episodes 3 and 4, the order of events tend to get more out of focus and don't seem to relate to each other that well. For example, Shindo. The story introduced his character right after the part where Miyamura and Hori hold hands. Not only did this come completely out of nowhere, but it also completely takes away from the plot of this episode. He shows up one time this entire episode and his appearance is almost comedic. It's kind of like a cameo that you see in movies where out of nowhere this famous person shows up for a small segment of the story. But that shouldn't be placed directly after a very emotional and moving scene. Otherwise, it might mitigate or reduce the effect of that scene. Now Shindo does come back in episode 4, but he did not get a good introduction. Plus, I have other gripes with this character that I'll bring up later. Anyways, episode 4 of the show focuses on Hori and Miyamura's relationship, so it's just like the rest of the episodes, only this time, we have Shindo in the mix. So, apparently Shindo was a childhood friend of Miyamura's, and okay, I guess we're talking about this now. I don't know how Shindo is in the manga, but his existence within the show only hurts the meaning that Hori and Miyamura's relationship had. Here we go. The fact that Miyamura actually had a friend the whole time not only makes me feel less sad for him when thinking about his backstory, but it makes the concept of Hori being the person to really get to know Miyamura and be friendly with him less impactful as well. The reason why Miyamura likes Hori is because she sees him for who he is and treats him like a friend. But why is that so special if someone else did this already? The only difference between the two is their gender, so I'm more inclined to believe that you're just a huge simp. Even ignoring that, how come Ishikawa is portrayed as such a bro when someone literally did the exact same thing he did for you, without being jealous of the fact that you seem to be friends with his crush? Sorry, this is just really irritating. Second, I really don't like how Miyamura's relationship with Shindo is portrayed. Every interaction he has with him is angry and spiteful. He treats his first and only friend for years like shit. He slaps the fuck out of him for just talking to another person, he yells at him for asking if he wants to go on a double date, and he makes fun of the guy after he receives solid romantic advice from him. This guy's only purpose is to make Miyamura look like a massive asshole and to undermine the effect that the main driving force of the story has on people. So that begs the question, why? In episode 3 of Horimiya, Hori was the one that Miyamura had a flashback about, which only serves to strengthen the relationship they built for the show. I just don't get why the original Horimiya felt the need to introduce a character like this. And that's not even the worst thing this episode does. This show decided that the audience needed to see our main couple get into some bullshit misunderstandings that'll hinder the progression and development of their relationship. Okay, so let me break down the sorry excuse for a plot. So Shindo has a girlfriend. Don't know how he got one, he just did. He's riding his bike with his girlfriend and they crash near Miyamura. Being the nice guy that he is, Miyamura helps up his friend's girlfriend, which of course leads to the girl latching onto Miyamura's arm in a misleading manner. And of course, because this is anime, Hori's brother sees this and tells Hori all about it. Can you guess what happens next? Hori gets mad about it and completely refuses to listen to Izumi's side of the story. To make things worse, this idiotic debacle happened right after Miyamura confessed to Hori in a completely unambiguous way. Because he did that, the audience gets hopeful that she will reciprocate those feelings for him so that we can see them get together. But instead of that, we're interrupted by something that nobody cares about, and they only clear up the confusion at the end of the episode. And you want to know what the worst part of all of this is? This is the last episode of the original anime. We never get to see what happens after this final moment, which, to add insult to injury, ends on a massive cliffhanger. Is this really how it's gonna end? I don't know the story behind this anime. I don't know if it was cancelled due to poor reception or bad ratings, or if this was actually the way they were planning to end it, but no matter what the truth is, I am unsatisfied, which thankfully I didn't watch this show earlier because I would have spent years getting over the depressing ending it had. Now, talking about episode 4 of the new Horimiya, let's talk about... oh god, Shindo. Okay, when I was watching this episode of the anime, I rolled my eyes when Shindo was confirmed to be in it. I was prepared for him to once again kind of destroy what the show's been building up this entire time, that being the relationship of these two. And he still does that a bit, but to a lesser extent. It all has to do with this one line that the new Horimiya decided to add for context.
俺の中学時代を変えたのはこの神道だった。
男子のおごりね。
そして今を変えるきっかけをくれたのは
宮村なんか楽しそうだし。
宮村早く。
きっと堀さん。
This line resolves a lot of my issues with Shindo as a character. Forgive me if I'm reading too much into this, but my interpretation of this line is as follows. Miyamura was isolated in middle school because nobody wanted to talk to him, except for Shindo. When Shindo talked to Miyamura, it felt like he just felt bad for him, which contrasts the previous flashback of Hori talking to Miyamura because she just wanted to. After Izumi and Shindo became friends, they had to split up because Shindo was held back, so when Miyamura went to high school, he went through the same thing, leading him to believe that Shindo was just an exception to the fact that everyone will ignore him instead of trying to get to know him. This is why Hori had such a huge impact on him when they interacted for the first time, and the reason why Miyamura was so afraid of the thought Hori and Ishikawa dating in the first episode. Aside from that, another scene that I want to touch upon was the scene where Hori was sick and Miyamura was taking care of her. It goes more into detail about Hori's relationship with her mother. There's a pretty subtle difference between the way the two anime handled this scene, and it's not really present in the scene itself. What I'm talking about is Hori's mother. In the original, Hori's mom shows up for around 30 seconds. That's completely fine. It does give a feeling of distance between the two, but in the new one we get to see how they talk to and view each other, making for better build up for this scene. In the new Horimiya, what do we see about Hori's mom? Well, she works a lot and she's pretty nice, but because she works a lot, all she really does when she gets home is have a massage from Hori and eat microwave curry with her children. Sometimes. A part of the second episode that interested me was when Hori's mother deliberately sent Hori on errands so that she could have a one-on-one chat with Miyamura. This was portrayed as a joke during the moment, but when you think about it, it does explain Hori's pent-up feelings pretty well. Her mother is rarely home, and the one time she is, she decides to talk to a complete stranger. It all builds up nicely to this moment in the newest episode of the new Horimiya. The scene honestly made me tear up a bit, whereas the same scene in the original only made me think that it was a nice moment between the two. I don't know if any of this criticism or praise will hold up when episode 5 of the new anime comes out, but for right now, I think that the new Horimiya is generally a better experience than the original one. But then again, who really cares? Anyways, if you watched the entirety of the video, then thanks and goodbye for now.